Is there any pain greater than having $800 million in your hands and still facing a chapter of life filled with tears? Céline Dion. The voice that once made the world fall silent with a single breath. She sang the power of love, not as a song, but as belief, as if devotion itself could hold broken lives together. She gave us My Heart Will Go On and turned one melody into a global memory of love that refuses to die. For generations, hearts did not just listen. They survived with her. But admiration is ruthless. Beneath the ovations lived silences no one ever noticed. Beneath the brilliance, a body pressing forward through illness. Beneath the thunder, a woman still singing, while grief tightened its grip. Her voice did more than carry emotion. It absorbed love torn away, dreams forced to wait, and a private agony sealed behind flawless perfection. What her name carries is staggering. $800 million, more than 250 million records sold. Las Vegas residencies that rewrote entertainment history. Perfume empires. Fashion ventures. The scale becomes visible in places. A $72 million Bahamian-inspired estate on Jupiter Island. A French chateau on a private island in Quebec, valued at $25.5 million, and a quiet Nevada mansion worth $4.5 million, where her children's laughter still echoes through rooms shaped by years that never slowed. A Maybach 62, a Mercedes-Benz S350, a Cadillac Escalade, not indulgence, but distance, covered without pause, and a $42 million Bombardier Global Express private jet, always in motion. And after everything, what remains is not just an empire built to be admired, but endurance pushed to its limit. For those close enough to truly see, it isn't wealth. It is an entire life taken away, piece by piece. If that voice ever stood by you in moments of weakness, leave a like. How cruel it is to enter the world wrapped in music, yet starved of everything else. Céline Marie Claudette Dion was born on March 30th, 1968, in Charlemagne, Quebec, the youngest of 14 children in a home where melodies spilled from every corner. Yet survival was scarce. Her parents, musicians themselves, filled the air with song, but hunger and the cold seeped into every crack. Her first cradle wasn't a cradle, it was a drawer pulled from a cabinet, lined with thin, worn blankets, rocking a baby whose voice would one day command stadiums. Lullabies weren't sung to her. They drifted through frigid floorboards from her siblings' late-night rehearsals. From her very first breath, Céline's life demanded endurance, not comfort. And from that relentless crucible emerged a voice of staggering clarity and power. By age 5, she sang at her brother's wedding, not as a charming novelty, but as a lifeline, a fragile girl defying the harshness surrounding her. By 12, she co-wrote songs with her mother, recorded a single demo with her brother Michel, and sent it to René Angelil in Montreal. When he heard her voice, he wept, calling it the voice of an angel, and mortgaged his home to fund her debut album. A gamble rooted not in business, but in faith. Céline, with crooked teeth, shy eyes, and a voice too vast for her small frame, stood in freezing studios while other children played and danced. She practiced vowels, mastered breath control, and learned English phonetically, sacrificing sleep, birthdays, and every softness of childhood. I never had the luxury of growing up like other girls. Only the echo of notes and the weight of a dream, she would recall, her voice laced with both gratitude and a piercing ache. Every deprivation became raw material, forging her dream in steel and silent suffering. Her first song, La Voix du Bon Dieu, became a hit in Quebec. At 14, she performed in Tokyo before 115 million viewers. A girl from forgotten corners of French Canada transformed into an international star. Yet behind every glittering note lay invisible sacrifice. Lost birthdays, vanished playtimes, relentless rehearsals. In her memoir, Céline reflected, "I never experienced a teenage life. Just costumes, microphones, and the cold morning hours before soundcheck." She carried not only her dream, but the weight of 14 hungry mouths, René's life-risking faith, and a family's fragile hope. That weight sculpted her resilience and defined her voice, forging it into the heartbeat of generations. Later, she would say, "I would sleep in a drawer again, if it meant I could still sing," a testament to the indomitable spirit that refused to break. From poverty to global stages, from silence to symphonies, from a drawer to the world, Céline's journey was never about fame, but about endurance, belief, and the profound cost of a life destined to inspire awe. Each note she sang is a bridge between suffering and triumph, a lesson in perseverance, devotion, and the quiet heroism of a young girl who gave everything to be heard. Sometimes, even in the coldest seasons of a childhood shaped by scarcity and silence, life demands a decision long before it offers kindness. She was only 12 when she met him, a fragile girl with timid eyes and a voice far too vast for her small frame, still learning how to stand upright in a world that asked for strength before it offered protection. He was 26 years older, seasoned by failure and patience, steady in a way that only time can teach. When René Angelil pressed play on her cassette, he did not hear a child rehearsing a dream. He heard a soul already carrying a weight too heavy for its years. The sound cracked something open inside him, not because it was perfect, but because it was unguarded. And in that quiet moment, he made a choice that would bind their lives forever. He placed his own home on the line to give her voice a future. It was not calculation, it was surrender. A man staking his entire existence on a girl who had not yet learned how merciless admiration could be. From that day forward, what they built was never simply a career climbing charts and filling halls. It was a refuge carved out of risk, a shelter assembled while the storm was already forming, where belief came first and the cost followed silently behind. As her name rose higher, his presence receded further into shadow. While the world watched a young girl transform into something it could consume and celebrate, René chose to stand between her spirit and the hunger of applause. He absorbed the pressure so she could breathe. When exhaustion blurred her voice, he spoke in her place. When doubt crept in, he anchored her steps. When the lights burned too close, he stood between her and the heat, taking the scorch so she would not have to. In later years, Céline would not remember those seasons as victory, but as endurance. Days stitched together by discipline, nights cut short by rehearsal, and a constant forward motion that left little room to ask what was being left behind. "I kept moving," she once recalled softly, because stopping felt more frightening than continuing. Somewhere along that relentless ascent, trust deepened into something more dangerous and more necessary. At 19, she wrote him a letter, placing feelings into words she had hidden even from herself. At 20, love found its shape, not declared, not defended, but carefully guarded, like something that might not survive the light. It was never a rebellion against the world. It was a shelter from it. With him, I could finally breathe and be whole, she reflected years later. And within that sentence lived the truth of the journey. Safety had become rare, and love had become the only place where she could rest without being watched. Their marriage in 1994 at Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal did not feel like a celebration staged for history. It felt like a vow made against the current of a life already claimed by expectation. She walked down the aisle not as an icon adored by millions, but as a woman choosing devotion over ease, loyalty over applause. From that moment on, Renee became everything at once: husband, manager, mirror, anchor, father to her children, and the quiet architect holding her world upright. Together, they built a life balanced on impossible contrasts: arenas and nurseries, trophies and whispered goodnights, Grammys and bedtime prayers. He never stepped into the spotlight, never asked to be named, only to ensure that she could withstand what admiration demanded of her day after day. And she gave him everything in return: her youth, her discipline, her unrelenting work, her trust, her willingness to keep going when stopping might have saved pieces of herself. In later interviews, she would say, with aching clarity, "He was my only love. The woman I became was shaped by his belief in me." Even now, when the stage holds only one figure beneath its lights, that truth remains. Because long before the world learned her name, someone taught her how to survive being admired. And that lesson, paid for quietly across a lifetime, still lives inside every step she takes forward. When she sang, time did not pause. It surrendered. Céline Dion never pursued attention through spectacle or controversy. She earned it breath by breath, from hunger, from restraint, from a place where survival mattered more than ambition. Long before applause learned her name, each perfect note had already been rehearsed in silence, shaped in rooms where a poor girl from Quebec discovered that endurance always came before comfort. In 1990, stepping into English language music with unison was not an expansion, it was exposure. Her accent was mocked, her place questioned, her future dismissed by voices convinced she did not belong. She reshaped her vowels, tightened her discipline, and let her voice speak where explanations failed. Where Does My Heart Beat Now broke into the US top 5, not because doors opened, but because she stood knocking until the sound could no longer be ignored. "I learned to sing through resistance," she once reflected, "because waiting for permission felt like losing myself." From that moment, her voice crossed oceans, dissolved language, and carried emotion where words could no longer survive. By 1992, her duet in Beauty and the Beast turned a simple melody into shared memory. Children fell quiet, parents paused, lovers leaned closer. Recognition followed, but meaning always came first. Then, in 1997, when the world revisited loss through My Heart Will Go On, the song became more than a phenomenon. It became refuge. It sold over 30 million copies, earned an Academy Award and multiple Grammys, and echoed through weddings, funerals, and nights of private grief across the globe. Yet behind that trembling vibrato stood a woman already carrying the weight of being needed by millions. Interviews celebrated triumph. They did not ask about the migraines, the vocal strain, the nights without sleep when the next performance waited without mercy. "I kept walking forward," she later admitted softly, "because stopping felt heavier than the pain itself." In 2003, when she accepted a Las Vegas residency, critics dismissed as a graceful ending. She transformed it into something sacred. More than 700 shows, over $600 million in ticket sales, and more than 3 million people who left feeling less alone. The real currency was never money, it was presence. Her concerts became confession, sanctuary, a place where strangers felt seen. She did not simply perform, she gave herself, carefully and completely, night after night, until the giving became its own quiet wound. As her empire expanded beyond music, global tours, best-selling perfumes, fashion lines, wealth accumulated almost as a byproduct of persistence, rising beyond $500 million without ever becoming her compass. Success followed her, but it never led her. What mattered were the letters from those who survived illness or heartbreak because her songs convinced them to endure one more day. She stood before presidents, opened Olympic ceremonies, shook hands with royalty, yet the quiet triumph that mattered most happened far from cameras, singing lullabies to her sons in rooms where applause could not reach. Even as trends shifted and critics circled, she remained standing. Not because it was easy, but because she had learned how to remain upright when standing itself was the cost. Sometimes, beneath the pyrotechnics and orchestras, her thoughts drifted back to simpler images. A kitchen floor in Charlemagne, a spoon-turned microphone, a drawer that once held her like a cradle. The spotlight may have crowned her a queen, but it was discipline, humility, and relentless purpose that kept her there. Her voice lifted millions, but it also stitched together the quiet fractures inside her. And even as ovations thundered, she understood something few could see. Every note carried a weight no one applauded, a burden she accepted without protest, and still she sang. Her life shimmered like legend, standing ovations in languages she never learned to speak, arenas trembling beneath a voice that seemed to steady the world, love letters written in light from Tokyo to Toronto. For years, she did not simply sing, she carried people. Her voice did not echo, it settled, healed, stayed. Yet no ascent escapes gravity forever. When the descent came, it did not bruise her career. It reached past the lights, past the applause, and struck the only place she had ever rested: home. René Angelil was never merely a manager, never just a husband. He was the quiet rhythm beneath her silences, the heat behind every trembling note. They met when she was 12, barely tall enough for the microphone, already bearing dreams too heavy for a child. He saw no novelty, no gamble, only destiny, and placed everything he owned behind it, mortgaging his home, his safety, his future, entrusting it to a girl the world had not yet learned to pronounce. What they built was never only a career. It was sanctuary, sacred, fragile, too intimate for headlines, too profound for charts. Then, in 2013, the world shifted. The diagnosis arrived: throat cancer, swift, merciless. The same illness that once threatened her voice now reached for the man who had given her one. She did not negotiate with fate. She stepped away from the stage mid-tour, mid-momentum, mid-everything, and disappeared into corridors where time moved by the rhythm of machines and measured breaths. The world kept applauding. She was elsewhere, holding a hand growing colder, learning how powerless love can feel. Once, just before dawn, she stood alone outside a hospital room, fingers pressed to the wall, listening to a monitor count what words could not. Her voice, which had filled stadiums, softened into lullabies whispered under fluorescent lights. No costumes, no audience, only vigilance, waiting, and a strength she had never needed before. She had always leaned on him. Now she became the one who steadied. I sang almost in a whisper, she would recall later, because sometimes love speaks without sound. Every note was a prayer shaped like breath, and even prayer, she learned, has edges it cannot cross. On January 14th, 2016, the silence answered. His breath, the one that steadied her from backstage, that spoke courage with a glance, was gone. Not fading, gone. And with it, the architecture of her life cracked. She did not unravel in public. Grief was something she guarded. But inside, the foundation shifted forever. Still, she stood. For him. She returned to Notre Dame Basilica, the same place where eternity had once been promised, and walked the aisle alone. Each step stretched like a lifetime. The empty pew beside her carried more weight than any crowd. Beneath the stained glass, she understood she now held both halves of a vow meant for two. That day was not only farewell, it was the end of safety, the quiet burial of home. Since then, every song has carried absence inside it. Every performance leaves a space unfilled, a chair no one else can claim. And just before the final note, there is sometimes a brief stillness, a breath held, a gaze lifted, like a habit learned in another life, as if asking, "Did that reach you?" The world may not notice. But love like that does not vanish. It does not loosen its grip. It stays, unseen, unbroken, echoing through every note she dares to sing again. Grief, at its cruelest, does not arrive with warning. It gives way beneath your feet. For Céline Dion, losing René was not the end of mourning. It was the first fracture. Just as she was relearning how to breathe without the man who had steadied every stage and carried her dreams, fate struck again. 2 days later, January 16th, 2016, her brother Daniel was gone. Cancer took him too, swift and unsparing, as if time refused to grant even the mercy of distance. Within 48 hours, her life split cleanly in two. The man who had built her future, and the brother who guarded her past. Daniel lived in her earliest fabric, shared lullabies, whispered hopes, a home that sang long before it felt safe. Now, she buried them both before the flowers on the first grave had begun to dull. There was no space between funerals, no breath to gather. Pain did not come in waves. It arrived all at once and stayed. In those days that barely moved, she walked not as an icon, but as a woman carrying more absence than a body should hold. Rituals blurred, hands shook as she greeted mourners. Gratitude formed on her lips, while her spirit drifted somewhere quieter. At Daniel's memorial, there were no lights, no music, only silence pressing inward. The voice that once filled arenas thinned into broken prayers. She lit 2 candles with unsteady hands, one for the love who had shaped her life, one for the brother who had shared its beginning. I remember asking myself, she would later say, how a heart keeps its rhythm when it wants to follow the ones it loves. The question stayed. Grief altered her, made her smaller, quieter, as if the music inside now played through glass. And still, she remained upright, not for applause, for remembrance. Nights found her alone in her Montreal home, holding a photograph until her knuckles burned, lips moving without sound as the house breathed around her. Once, just before dawn, she set the photo down and stood very still, long enough to feel the floor, long enough to choose the next step. This was not a single goodbye. It was a sequence so tightly bound that even time seemed ashamed. Yet she stood, because honoring love was the only direction she recognized. The world remembers the gowns, the songs, the lights, but it must also remember this. Behind the curtain stood a woman carrying 2 funerals in one heart, walking through darkness with little left but faith, and choosing, again, to sing. Not because she was unbroken, but because standing had become the shape of her survival. Long before cameras captured Céline Dion draped in black, long before grief learned to speak in headlines, she had already discovered how sorrow could exist without witnesses. Years earlier, inside the sealed quiet of hospital rooms, she carried a loss that never reached the world, a grief folded inward like a song written for a child who would never grow older. Her niece, Céline Dion, was 16, fragile, radiant, born into a war she never chose. Cystic fibrosis, a disease that tightens breath and erases futures slowly, without drama. While the world rose to Céline's voice, she slipped away from stages to bedsides, exchanging applause for the steady pulse of monitors, holding Cérine's hand as oxygen machines whispered what language could not. She did not arrive as a star, but as an aunt, humming lullabies beneath fluorescent lights, believing even briefly that melody might reach places medicine could not. Céline loved music, loved Céline, and somewhere in that stillness, Céline learned a truth no audience teaches you. Love can fill a room, but it cannot stop time. When Céline died, the world did not pause. There were no headlines, no public grief to lean on. Céline did not explain. She sat alone at a piano. From that silence came Vol, Fly, not written for charts, not shaped for applause. It was her last offering, a goodbye folded into breath, a prayer released instead of cried. She did not raise her voice. She let it go, note by trembling note. Fly, little angel, beyond this hard world, toward the peace you were meant to know. She would later recall, the words formed less for ears than for the unseen. The song never chased success. Yet it remains among the most sacred things she has ever made, not because it was heard by millions, but because it was honest. Even now, decades later, that loss lives quietly beneath her ballads, a softness in her tone, a hesitation between breaths, as if she is still singing to Céline through time. Not all grief announces itself. Some of it lives in unfinished lullabies, in candles never lit, in silences too tender to disturb. For Céline, Vol became more than music. It became a vow, etched into sound, that love does not end when a body does. It transforms. It learns another shape. Long before the world asked her to carry its heartbreak, she had already learned, alone, unseen, how to take loss into her chest and turn it into something that could still breathe. For Céline Dion, motherhood never arrived as a gentle blessing. It came like a private war, fought far from the lights, carved out of blood, longing, and nights so long, even the stars seemed to turn away. Beneath gowns that glittered under spotlights and anthems that crossed oceans, there was a woman kneeling in the dark, whispering the same prayer again and again, to carry life, to feel a heartbeat, answer her own. After marrying René Angélil, the man who had risked everything so her voice could be heard, she dreamed of giving them both a beginning that required no stage. But nature resisted. Pregnancy did not come. While the world applauded her vocals, it never saw the bruises from daily injections, never heard the click of syringes before dawn, never felt the ache behind the smile she wore beneath flashing cameras. Years of IVF, 2 surgeries, endless hormones, endured quietly, like a soldier who never leaves her post, led at last to a sound that rewrote her world. René Charles' heartbeat in 2000. When he was born, in January 2001, it was not simply a birth. It was the arrival of every unseen tear, every night spent imagining arms that were still empty. I remember thinking, she would later say softly, this sound means I survived everything before it. But even that miracle came wrapped in fragility. In 2009, while the world believed she was recording, Céline suffered a miscarriage that shattered her in silence. No statements, no headlines, only grief, dense and airless, hidden behind tour curtains and hotel walls. She stepped onto stages, singing lullabies to millions, while mourning the lullaby she would never sing to that child. "I learned how to smile through it," she reflected years later, "because some pains don't ask for witnesses." She did not retreat. At 42, after another round of IVF and prayers that felt closer to pleading than hope, she gave birth to twins, Nelson and Eddie, in 2010. Two more miracles, drawn from a body already pushed beyond warning. The joy was real, but it carried scars. Every embrace held exhaustion. Every smile hid a quiet fear. That time or fate might one day steal her from the sons she had fought so fiercely to meet. Then, as if triumph itself had stirred fate's jealousy, Renee was taken in 2016. Overnight, she was no longer only a mother, she was a widow, raising 3 boys alone, trying to be lullaby and anchor, compass and shelter, when all she wanted was to lean into the man meant to stand beside her. The voice that once filled arenas now sang mostly at night, in dim rooms where the audience was small and the love immeasurable. There were no ovations, no curtain calls, only the hush of blankets, the weight of responsibility, and a strength few ever witnessed. Fame came to her like wildfire. Motherhood she earned breath by breath. And when she looks into the eyes of Renee Charles, Nelson, and Eddie, she does not only see sons, she sees survival. Every needle, every loss, every note sung through pain. In the pauses between her softest lyrics, if the world listens closely enough, it can hear the truth she never announces. Not just a singer, not just a star, but a mother who bled in silence to build the family she now holds, like a sacred melody meant only for her. She once stood beneath the brightest lights, singing with a voice so vast and celestial that entire arenas fell silent, not from obligation, but awe. Céline Dion was never merely a performer. She was a vessel of something sacred, a living hymn, forged from heartbreak and grace. When she stepped on stage, she didn't just sing. She healed, confessed, remembered. Her voice was thunder, wrapped in silk, seemingly indestructible. And yet, long before the world sensed any fracture, an invisible war had already begun inside her body. As early as 2005, something shifted. Her vocal cords resisted her will. Her breath tightened without warning. Fear arrived quietly, then stayed. "It frightened me in a way I couldn't name," she would later recall, a dread no standing ovation could drown out. What began as fleeting discomfort hardened into relentless stiffness. Her body, once perfectly obedient to music, became contested ground, muscles locked like iron, spasms struck without rhythm or mercy. Breathing, once instinct, turned into labor, measured and uncertain. To the outside world, she blamed colds, exhaustion, overwork, anything but the truth. On stage, she soared. Backstage, she collapsed. Alone, she battled pain that had no name until survival demanded extremes. Valium, up to 90 milligrams a day, not to escape fear, but simply to stand, to swallow, to function. "I realized later how close I came to losing everything," she admitted quietly, the words heavy with disbelief. Still, she refused to stop. When her voice trembled mid-performance, she turned the microphone toward the crowd, inviting them to sing. Not because she couldn't continue, but because she would not let them see the cost. It wasn't pride, it was protection. The show moved forward while her body unraveled in silence. Each performance paid for in private. In 2022, the silence finally broke. The diagnosis arrived: stiff person syndrome, rare, relentless, a disorder that turns muscle into steel, steals movement, and tightens its grip on every freedom once taken for granted. In I Am Céline Dion, the world finally witnessed what she had hidden for years. Not a diva fading, but a warrior breaking in private. In one devastating scene, she lies on a therapy table, her body convulsing beyond control, hands clenched as a therapist whispers, "Squeeze if it hurts." And she does, again and again, until her face gives way and even the air feels too heavy to hold. There is no music in that room, no applause, no encore, only Céline, and the shadow of everything she is fighting not to lose. For a woman whose identity was built on command of breath and tone, losing control of her body is not a diagnosis, it is a dismantling. And yet, even as her muscles betray her, something deeper refuses to surrender. She stands in a studio again, trembling but resolute. "If it breaks, then it breaks," she says softly. "But if it answers me, that will be happiness." These are not lines rehearsed for cameras. They are survivals spoken aloud. Today, Céline Dion may no longer command stadiums the way she once did, but in her quiet resistance, she sings louder than ever. Every spasm endured, every breath reclaimed, every step taken, despite pain, has become her new performance. Less about pitch, more about perseverance. What the world once admired as invincibility has revealed its truest form, not perfection, but endurance. And in choosing, again and again, to stand inside a body that no longer obeys, she has become more than the echo of her former glory. She has become something rarer, proof that even when the voice falters, purpose can still rise, slowly, painfully, and with a courage no spotlight could ever teach. Today, at the age of 56, Céline Dion no longer lives beneath the blinding lights of world tours or the thunder of sold-out arenas, but within a carefully guarded quiet, one shaped not by retreat, but by choice. After conquering global charts, collecting Grammy Awards, and redefining the very standard of vocal mastery, her life has turned inward. Financially, her legacy remains staggering. With an estimated net worth exceeding $800 million built across decades of diamond-selling albums, historic Las Vegas residencies, global tours, and successful ventures in perfume and fashion, Céline stands among the most successful women in music history. Yet today, that fortune no longer functions as a symbol of conquest. It has become a buffer, deliberately structured, carefully managed, to protect what is now most fragile: her health, her children, and the diminishing luxury of time. Wealth, once a measure of expansion, has become a form of shelter. Her former material world tells the quiet story of recalibration. The legendary $72 million Bahamian-inspired estate in Florida, once a vision of waterfront grandeur, was sold when upkeep no longer matched the rhythm of her life. The $25.5 million chateau in Quebec, built on a private island as a tribute to her roots, has been entrusted to long-term planning rather than daily living. Today, Céline resides primarily in Las Vegas, Nevada, in a refined $4.5 million desert estate, chosen not for spectacle, but for privacy, security, and accessibility. The home is adapted for calm, controlled spaces, minimal stimulation, and rooms designed around healing rather than hosting. Even her once celebrated collection of luxury vehicles, reported over the years to include high-end Mercedes Maybach and Rolls-Royce models, symbols of mobility and freedom, now sits largely unused. At her peak, private aviation offered efficiency and control, with long-term charters and access to aircraft in the Gulfstream class, valued in the tens of millions. Today, travel itself is measured carefully, sometimes avoided altogether. What once represented velocity now serves only contingency. Every asset has been simplified, every possession reassessed, not as status, but as infrastructure for survival. Since publicly revealing her diagnosis with stiff person syndrome in December 2022, Céline has withdrawn almost entirely from public life. The disorder, rare, progressive, and relentlessly painful, has forced the cancellation of all remaining tour dates and her long-anticipated return to the Las Vegas stage. Yet this withdrawal is not surrender, it is recalibration. Her days are structured around intensive care, physiotherapy focused on mobility, breath and speech work, pain management, and deep, closely monitored rest. Nutrition is carefully curated for anti-inflammatory support. A body once trained to endure punishing schedules under spotlights now requires precision, gentleness, and patience. Visibly, she has changed, thinner, more fragile. Her movements slower, but her eyes still carry the unmistakable fire of a woman who has never learned how to quit. Public sightings are rare and fleeting, often captured as she is assisted into a vehicle, wrapped in scarves and oversized sunglasses. And yet, each image tells the same story. Not defeat, but resolve. At the center of her life are her sons. René Charles, now 23, is quietly carving his own artistic path under the name R.C. Angelil, exploring production and rap while deliberately avoiding the glare of his mother's legacy. Nelson and Eddie, now 14, are shielded fiercely from public exposure, raised with intentional anonymity, discipline, and emotional grounding. Despite declining health, Céline remains the steady core of their world, overseeing education, guiding emotional development, and instilling the same work ethic that once shaped her ascent. Estate planning is reportedly underway, not as an act of fear, but of maternal clarity, ensuring continuity and protection long after she is gone. She no longer performs for crowds, but she has not abandoned music. In her home studio, she hums softly, sings in the mornings, and occasionally meets with vocal coaches, not to reclaim fame, but to stay close to the voice that once carried her through everything. Beyond her private walls, Céline's influence continues to move outward. Her sustained advocacy for children's hospitals, her support for cystic fibrosis research in memory of her niece Karine, and countless quiet acts of generosity have amplified causes that needed more than money. They needed empathy and visibility. Her songs still live where life happens most honestly, in wedding halls and funeral chapels, in midnight drives, in moments when words fail. Illness may have silenced the stage, but it has not diminished the echo. Her story has shifted from vocal triumph to human courage. She is no longer chasing applause. She outgrew it long ago. Her voice may crack, her hands may tremble, but her silence now speaks louder than fame ever could. In a world obsessed with reinvention, Céline Dion endures because she never abandoned who she was. Her life reminds us that admiration always carries a weight, and that true greatness is revealed not at the height of success, but in the quiet choices made when the lights are gone. And now, we turn to you. For those who grew up with her songs, who survived heartbreak, loss, or hope with her voice beside you, what does Céline Dion mean in your life? Which song held you together when nothing else could? Which lyric still finds you, years later, exactly where you are? Share your memory below, because your voice, your story, your moment with her music, that is the chorus that keeps her legacy alive, even now, when she sings not for the world, but for life itself.